Thank you so much for tuning into the show, and welcome to Season 2 of the Audiobook Club with John York. The Audiobook Club, partnered with Pro Audio Voices, celebrates audiobooks, the amazing people and teams who make them happen, as well as the various talents behind storytelling. To learn more about Amplify and other opportunities to grow your sales, platform, and audience, head over to proaudiovoices.com and listen out for a short but informational advertisement within this episode. Let's start the show. Hello and welcome to the final episode of Season 2 of the Audiobook Club. In this week's episode, we're so lucky to be joined by audiobook narrator and actor Pavi Proczko. Pavi, it's so lovely to have you join us on the show. How are you today?
I am very well. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you for taking the time. So as is tradition on the show, I would love to start by asking you quite a big question, and that is how you first began your journey in this crazy world of audiobooks.
Oh, man. So I was a stage actor. I was a musical theater major in a past life 1,000 years ago, and I liked it a lot. I still sing, and I was performing for a while, even while doing the audiobooks. But it really I took to audiobooks as a consumer. I like to listen to them because I was riding my bike everywhere because I'm in Chicago, a starving artist, and I have no other way to get anywhere. And the public transit's too expensive even. So I'm on my bike everywhere, and I started listening to audiobooks that way. And I just fell in love with listening to it, and I just thought maybe I could do that. And so after toying around with that idea for a little while, I found my way to ACX, which I think also a lot of us ended up at. And a friend of mine, just his partner was doing audiobooks, recommended it. I looked it up. I signed up. I put a headshot up and some samples, like took some books off the shelf, recorded, and was very lucky, got a few good gigs like right off the bat, and just started doing it while I was doing this day job, while I was doing some theater still, and then they fired me from my day job because I didn't want to do it anymore, and I got very lazy, and I was like, I want to go back to part-time, and they were like, okay. 3 months later, they're like, you're out. And so I just kind of put my head down and really focused on the audiobooks. Started really putting in a lot of auditions, meanwhile doing, deliveries on my bicycle to like make ends meet if I needed to. But again, I was very lucky. I got a couple series that were paying really well, and they were popular, and I was able to survive for a little while longer. And eventually it just got good enough that I even didn't really want to do the live performing anymore. For now, I reserve the right to go back on that, but especially in Chicago, not to disparage an entire community, but I'll probably disparage the entire community now. I just was not a fan of the Chicago theater scene, and in some ways that were just really, I love a lot about it, and there were some ways that it just was kind of untenable. As I'm like was reaching my 30s, and I'm like, I don't think I could do this anymore. I'm just tired, and had gone through like this big breakup, and started seeing my current husband, and it was just like there was a lot of changes going on. And so I kind of ended up taking a step back after I ruined my voice, which is horrifying for an audiobook narrator. I did a stage play that really kind of messed up my voice, because it was like an acoustic problem, and they weren't miking us, and it was very bad. And so I was like, you know what? I have a superpower, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to do the audiobooks and see where that goes. And, now the rest is history.
Did you? Because I know you have a background in music also. And
Yeah.
with acting and obviously voice acting and narration, there's also writing as well thrown in there that I want to ask you a little bit about later
Sure.
on. Was a creative career like a non-negotiable for you? With all those interests, like all of your interests, to at least to an outsider looking in, they're incredibly
Yeah.
creative. They're all storytelling, and that links into another conversation we're going to have in a little bit. But I just wondered, is that were you just somebody who was like, I need to share stories, I need to create?
I think I always liked, I mean, when I was a kid, I just like thinking back. I've thought about this recently, actually. A lot of therapy, going back in time, thinking about why I do the things I do. Uh, I was really a heavy, like, imaginative child. Like, heavily imaginative. I was, fighting the apple tree in the backyard that was really like a giant squid with 1,000 arms, and I loved kind of like recreating the movies I was watching, and I often played alone. So I'm like, sword fighting nobody, and trying to kind of like put on these little presentations, not even for anyone, but try to kind of like get my friends to take part in the little stories that I want to like play out, um, and trying to find ways to kind of like gamify that so that I wouldn't bore my friends to death. I don't know if I was ever really that enamored of telling stories to people when I was young. That kind of came later, I think, when I started like thinking about the theory of storytelling, and like especially kind of started really with music, I think. I did really like reading fantasy, and I loved, the Chronicles of Narnia. It was like the first series that I read when I was really young, and I just fell into it. But I had no interest or even thought that I was capable of creating something like that. I just always thought I would be kind of producing what someone else did, um, which is still storytelling, but I wasn't going to be the generative idea builder. That didn't really start happening until music. My taste in music is antiquated. Like, I haven't quite gotten past the 1870s yet. I'm like, I'm like still with Brahms. I'm like, I'll see when I'll move on after that. I like a cult, like pop culture is like a real cultural blind spot for me. In a lot of like I just love classical music and romantic music, and so I'm like, oftentimes that's what I'm listening to and analyzing. And there was just like some point I was listening to Brahms' first violin sonata, and I just it was the thing that kind of convinced me that I wanted to learn how to do that, because I just kept thinking I would listen to like a Tchaikovsky symphony or Beethoven. Beethoven is brilliant, and think about like, God, if only I could make something like that.
Hmm.
That would be so cool, but it's not for me. But there is a little bit of a kernel there. There was a desire in the back of my mind to be able to create something like that from scratch. Um, and this piece of music, this Brahms violin sonata, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to do it. And so I started learning how to do it, and that kind of exploded into this, I don't know, this desire to make stuff fresh. So I started taking classes at Second City in the writing program, and thinking about writing music for stuff. So that was kind of my focus. I'm like, I'm going to do like little sketches and write music for things. So I wrote a musical. I wrote a Beowulf musical years ago, and I was Beowulf and performed it. It was very cool. But it was my interest to kind of like contribute to the theater productions I was doing as a composer. I was interested in creating stories more once I started playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Nice.
And as often happens with dungeon masters, which I am a dungeon master, sometimes professionally even, that nobody else wanted to do it. And so I was like, fine, I'll do it. And turns out I really love doing it. And it just occurred to me that I was like, wait, I'm making all these stories up right now. Why can't I just kind of like, I'll turn it into prose and we'll make it a story. And turns out it's not that simple, and it's very difficult, but it pushed me to do that. So I was writing music. I was writing music for those campaigns. I was writing little stories for the campaigns. It all just kind of culminated into the writing part. So it was a slow build, I guess, long story short. I didn't always necessarily want to be telling my own stories. I wanted to, I don't know, there was something about, I mean, certainly the attention. I mean, there's always a little bit of narcissism in an actor, I think. I wanted the attention. I wanted to do something well. I like being good at the thing. And that was something I was good at. I was good at acting. I was good at singing. I was good at performance. I command a stage, if you will, if I'm ever on one. Um, and it that just the knowing intuitively that I'm good at it was the I don't know, that inspired kind of more as I went.
I get that. So when first starting and making those when first starting narration and in those early audiobooks, what would you say was the biggest challenge that you had to overcome when you first started?
I didn't have much money, so that certainly was challenging. I uh, when I first started, I was still living in an apartment with an ex. Uh, They weren't my ex yet, but then they eventually were. But I was in a closet, and that actually worked really well. It was nice. I got like a Blue Yeti microphone and was like sitting in my closet, and it was nicely isolated. And but then when I had to leave, I didn't have much money and got it like a little studio, and so I kind of had to make do with this small studio space and kind of just treat the whole thing. And so I got like this little like stupid tent, covered it in blankets so I could hide inside the tent. And it didn't really work that well. You can even hear it when you like listen to my early stuff. You're like, where is he? Um, it was good enough, obviously, to like, pass all of the QA stuff. But now I'm like, oh, I'm embarrassed. Oh, geez. So heavily processed to try to just kind of like cut out that reverb. Um, and it was finding the space to do it. That was number one challenge, and number two, I think, was finding the like self motivation to do it. And not because I wasn't going to do it, but it was harder to do than I expected, and it took more time than I expected, as everything always does. And I was working too much. So it was, I wasn't sleeping very much, and I was, out during the day trying to make deliveries at lunchtime and at dinner time, doing my Grubhub and Postmates and stuff. And then coming home and trying to record for hours, and I'm already exhausted, and then it's difficult. And so then I'm pushing more. And this is like a problem I still have, of course. I'm just like always packing too much time, too much work in a smaller amount of time. And so it was trying to figure out that work-life balance a little bit. That was a struggle for years and years. I mean, it's still a struggle really in the end, but yeah, it was the equipment, space, and then that kind of that mental, I don't know, the conscientiousness was a little over. I was too conscientious. I'm like, I really need to get this done, and I'm going to like suffer to make it happen because, I'm ignoring reality a little bit about like, here's what I can actually accomplish. And I'm refuse to believe that's all. I want to do more. I'm a superhuman.
I really resonate with that, and especially like if you're transitioning from a 9 to 5, or even when acting on stage, you have rehearsals, you have a set time to be there, you're told when to be there, and you have to do that. But whereas with this work, with narration work, if this is your full-time thing, um, you of course have a deadline, but the day's your oyster to do whatever you kind of want to do it with. How were you adapting to? I can kind of do whatever I want all day.
Yeah.
Like how did you find
Oh,
find that?
there's a big conflict there because I think I still have that conflict a little bit where I'm like, I can do whatever I want. I'm a goddamn adult. I can choose whether I take today off because I want to. And there's a little bit of an OCD bit in there where I'm like, no, if I and diagnosed, so nobody panic. I'm diagnosed. I take drugs, blah blah blah. But it's I have like this irrational fear that if I like don't do the work as I scheduled or promised myself to do, that like everything's gonna fall apart. I will get in the habit of taking the time off, and then um, I'll get lazy and I won't be able to finish, and then I'll be really behind, and then I won't be able to do my work, and then I'm gonna lose all my money, and then it's all gone. Um, so that's still a challenge now even. Um, but there is there are glimmers of hope there. It's nice to be able to, someone last minute's like, hey, I'm in town. Can you meet up? I'm like, well, yeah, because I can just go do things when I want, and I can work whenever I want. The caveat, of course, being like there are times in the day when my brain works better than others. So, and that even changes, which is like a new discovery for me where I'm like, well, I'm apparently in my 4 to 9 p.m. time now, where that's my ideal time. And sometimes it's like, oh, I'm really great if I start at 8 a.m. and I'm like done by noon. And like now I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm like waiting until 6
Really?
at night. And I'm like, oh, I guess I should start working. And then I'm like really productive for a little while, but I just like the rest of the day, I'm like, what do I do? I don't know. Um, it's always a little bit in flux, and not having to have a routine that uh, is imposed upon me. There is a comfort to that on one end, and then on the other end, it can cause a lot of anxiety too if I'm just not disciplining myself enough. So I kind of it's been a struggle of like hugging that self-discipline and um relaxation, that freedom bit back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah. How much are you sort of setting? Like, how much are you planning for a day's work typically? Do you have like a set amount of time or a set amount of chapters or pages or whatever that you record every day?
Yeah, I do. Or I try to. And I'm trying to be kinder to myself. Because I think it was maybe like I'm often have to do it anyway, but I have like very fancy spreadsheets that like do all these calculations for me and tell me how much I have to do in the day. And because when I'm procrastinating, I'm like playing with like formulas on Notion, and I'm like, how do I figure out how much I should read today? And I was doing 3 hours a day. I wanted to do 3 finished hours every day of audio. And for a while I was doing it, and then I got super burned out.
I was going to say
And then
that's
I
a
was finding
lot.
out that yeah, I was finding out that most
Yeah.
people weren't doing that. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I guess I could calm down. But of course I'm also very bad at saying no, or fear of losing a gig, or um, saying like, well, I can do it in 6 months. Is that okay? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, okay, fine. I can fit it in now. So now I have to do 3 hours a day in order to even like get it in. But if I'm being kind enough, if I am being um also strict with myself, I would say like 2 hours is pretty good. If it's just like around two, I like to get over two, but around two is, I think, reasonable. For me, especially now having had practice doing like 3 hours, 3.5 hours a day for like months. It's like, oh, two is easy. Jeez, it's like old hat. Um, but it tends to be finished hours is what I'm going for. Um, which ends up kind of like roughly equating to a word count. It's like, I don't know, 20,000 words, maybe something like that.
Yeah, the states around sort of 9,000 an hour, don't they?
Yeah,
I
I
think it's
think I'm
about, yeah.
a little fast, and I don't know if that's a problem. Hey, listeners, let me know if I'm speaking too quickly. Not now in my audiobooks, but it's like that's I wonder about it, because I'm like, I do the calculation. I'm like, oh, well, that was like 10,000 an hour. Was that too
Yeah.
fast? I don't know. I feel like I did well. Whatever. Yeah.
You hinted there about asking for feedback. How are you with
Yeah.
reviews? Do you do you
Um,
you know, is that because this I get different answers from everyone I ask about this, and some that I suspect may be telling a little bit of a fib. But like, how much attention do you pay to your reviews?
um, I don't take notes from my reviews. So that's one thing that I was like, I mean, I was an actor for a while, and my shows were getting reviewed, and very rarely was I actually ever reviewed. Sore spot. But um, it was a common thing as an actor to get feedback all the time. I'm either auditioning for things and not getting it, or trying to do a thing on stage and I get notes and I need to change what I'm doing. It's like it's um part of the collaborative feedback cycle. I'm running into that a lot now in my writing. I find I'm actually very good at taking feedback. I like getting notes. I think I would probably be less okay if my reviews weren't consistently good. If I wasn't getting, mostly 5-star reviews on Audible, then I'd probably be upset about it. But now I do some every now and then I look through them. I want to see what people are saying. Part of it is like knowing that my overall ratings are very good, so I can be sure to find good reviews. And oftentimes, even if people don't like the book, they're like, "But the narrator was great." I'm like, "Ah, yes, I made it better. See, look at me." But I think I am because of that, I'm able to have a bit of a sense of humor about it, and I just love when people hate me on the review. I think it is so funny. My favorite one I just read recently, it was like someone was like, "Book's terrible. I hated it. I don't like Pavi." Like that's so funny. I don't know why. It's just like no preamble, really, no reason why. Just like I don't like him. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, cool. Um, I don't know. And like the other times when people are like, you can't take much of it that seriously. It's like they blame me for the character that the author wrote.
Hmm. I've had
Weirdly,
that before.
I was like,
Yeah.
God, I hate Pavi. They made the character so whiny. I'm like, I mean, the character was whiny. I don't know. I didn't do that. Someone else wrote the book. You know that, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I had
but
someone
yeah.
email me through my website telling me that they didn't like where the character's storyline went. They thought that they should have ended up with somebody else. And he was like, that's got
Hmm.
nothing to do with me.
Yeah, it's like, oh well, thank you for your feedback. I'll pass it on to the author, I guess. I don't know.
It's been done.
Yeah, it's like I finished. I don't know what to do for you. Um, yeah, I do like looking at the feedback. Um, and I, especially with the narration, it's like it's just like Joe Schmo on the street is like, "Well, I liked it or I didn't," and there's not a whole lot of thought that goes into it, so there's not much to take from it. Um, if I will listen to my husband when he gives me feedback. I have some friends that if they listen, like I have some, voice coaches and things like that, that um, if they have feedback, I like to listen to that too. Especially if I'm creating something fresh, then I want the feedback. For the narration reviews, I find them more amusing than I do threatening or helpful, even.
Yeah, yeah, I get you. Your work in the fantasy adventure genres are so adored. Very
Yeah.
much. I was looking through the Audible, and you're right, people really do love them. And there's some fantastic reviews in there. Just want to put that out
Thank
there.
you.
What is it about the mystical, the magical adventures that draw you in as a performer?
Hmm. That is a good question. I've always liked fantasy a lot. Um, Star Wars as a kid and then getting older and it's like Lord of the Rings and I played, Zelda forever and you know, now I'm, professionally doing Dungeons and Dragons and reading these fantasy stories. I think as most people are drawn to these stories of great stakes and fantastical elements that you can kind of separate yourself, but you can still imagine the what if and revel in the I don't know the magic of people in dire straits. We like to see that. There's an interesting um, theory that I guess I stumbled upon it. I don't know. I'm taking writing classes now with the story grid, and I really like the story grid kind of framework for structuring stories or editing them and thinking about how the kind of line by line writing and word choice and what it means for this story at large. It's like gets very nitty gritty. But there was Sean Coyne is the author of the Story Grid, and he had this, I don't know, masterclass seminar that he talked about kind of his theory, which I don't know if it's actually real, but I found it compelling. There's the theory of like why we like stories. And if we imagine, back in like ice ages, like the calamity of like 10,000 years ago that like almost wiped out humankind, right? There's some like evidence of this, maybe. I don't know. He said so. So I'm going to go with it. We're just going to assume that he's right. Some calamity has almost wiped out our entire species, right? Most people didn't survive. And so it's like that Viktor Frankl quote. I think it's in there. And he says something about the guilt of the survivor's guilt is knowing that the best of them are no longer here. Everyone who survived did so by scratching down from the bottom and selling out their brothers. And, it's like the best of us fought and died. And everybody left was not the best of us. And there's something similar to that he's like, imagine this calamity 10,000 years ago that most of the species like dies. And you have everybody left were the people that those people protected, right? They stood at the thing and they took the brunt of it and they all died. Well, you have this basically species of cowards now that kind of like lived in the cave and hid away, but they had an example of something that they could look to, and they could pass on that story for just maybe a better way to live. Well, I knew that I survived because of this thing, and I can tell this story to kind of give the other people who need guidance in their lives a model to follow, and therefore storytelling, right? So we tell stories about the people who aren't able to tell their story because they died. And I don't have any of those skills, but I do know the stories. I'm going to tell you the story so that you can maybe take a little bit of that with you. And now we have our entire lives are stories, right? It's like we not only watch stories and it's been a part of our civilization forever, we also storify our lives. We make our and lives are not stories at all. Like but we imagine them that way. We imagine a cohesion. We imagine our lives in these chapters and as ourselves as protagonists, and there's a through line and there's a reason for everything. And so I think that these kind of action, adventure, fantasy stories, looping back around after that whole long thing, they speak directly to that visceral survival instinct and wanting to honor that thing that maybe we don't have or we think we don't have, to be able to experience these things that we're very likely to actually encounter once or twice in our lives to some extent in a safe environment. We can just watch this story, we can read this story or listen to the story and experience that to some degree to prepare us a little bit for that when we come to it, to give us guidance on kind of how to be human. I think that fantasy just kind of, it plays to the mythology element. We've been making stories with these fantastical gods and creatures and things forever. And it's like another kind of iteration. It's the descendant of that instinct.
That was such a good answer.
Thank you.
Specifically about why storytelling is so important.
Yeah.
And why it means so. Because you're absolutely right. It is ingrained in our DNA. Yeah, I'm blown away by that. Sorry. I really enjoyed that.
I cannot take credit for that, but yeah, it was a striking observation that when I listened to that, I was like, oh, wow. It just makes me think about even just when I tell stories, like, what am I actually doing? It just made my entire life mean something, which again, it's like a storytelling, that's the trope, right? It's like, I'm finding meaning. And so who knows if it's even true, but it's really, it kind of ticked a box in my brain.
Then a Moment.
Yes.
A podcast you co-host with Colin Funk.
Yes, then a moment, the podcast where two storytellers talk about stories. Two lifelong storytellers talk about, I always get that wrong. The podcast where two lifelong storytellers talk about stories.
Talk to me about it. Where did that come about? Why did you want to start this? Could you just tell us a little bit about how it all started and what
Sure.
viewers can look forward to?
Yeah. My husband and I are the co-hosts of this podcast. We'd been talking about doing a podcast for a while, partially because he's always pushing me to like capitalize on my audiobook fandom, which is a sidebar, a very difficult thing to do. To have access to the listeners is like really hard for an audiobook narrator. It's easier as the author because you get all your words put up, but it's just like, especially when working with like bigger publishers and there's like a lot of restriction about like what I can kind of plug and what I can say, and even then it's like they have to like wait to the end of the book to have me say something like follow me and go find me on Instagram and I'll say hi back. It's like that's even assuming they heard that thing, and it's like it works, but it's like I get like 1 or 2 a month and I'm like that's really sweet that you said hi, but it's like it's really not very easy to like get in touch. So all you listeners, go find your narrators that you like and follow them and connect with them because they're hoping to get to you. Um, but trying to capitalize on those things and create these followings and kind of establish an expertise in something, in what I'm doing. And our initial thought was to kind of do this review of audiobooks. So what we were going to do is we were going to have just do like these little kind of clips to be like, oh, let's just take a look at the cover and the title and listen to the sample and be like, so what do we think so far of this book? Yay or nay? And then we listen to like the first chapter and then we yay or nay. And then we like go on and listen to the whole thing. And we specifically wanted to do books that had like no one listening to them. Because I have a bunch like that from early on that I'm like, God, that book is so good. And nobody heard it. Nobody knows that book. And that's a travesty. And so it's like anything that has like less than 10 reviews or something like that. 10 ratings maybe, and so then we'd be able to kind of like plug these people who had books that just didn't like do well, even though they were good, or maybe they weren't, and just really being honest about like, here's why it didn't work, or it's like, oh, it's really good, but the cover doesn't do it justice at all. And really kind of getting into the nitty gritty of like specifically what's going on. Well, turns out there was a lot of work and there was no way to like, you can get like plugins and stuff that sort by ratings and stuff, but you can't even get like how many ratings. It's really hard to figure that out. So it's really just like kind of going through and sifting through Audible, which of course is showing you specifically stuff that you're interested in. And it just was not easy to find. And it was a lot of work, and it was stuff that I wasn't necessarily going to read or listen to anyway. And so we kind of like went back to the drawing board and trying to figure out what to do. And we were like on our way back from Door County, Wisconsin to Chicago. It's like a 4-hour drive. And we had just seen The Last 5 Years. It is a musical about a relationship. There's a movie of it on Amazon, incidentally, starring Jeremy Jordan and Anna Kendrick. And as a musical theater nerd, I was really into the album. It's a really great album to listen to, but I've seen it many times on stage and it never works. And we were just talking about kind of that, and we talked for like 4 hours about just like this story and what we might do and maybe why it doesn't work and what could have happened. And we realized we were always doing that with stories. We're reading a story or watching a TV show or watching a movie and saying, if they had just like added this one line, that would have just made the whole movie make sense. It doesn't even take a lot. It's just like just tweak it just a little bit and will like actually make sense. Or you can add like these 2 scenes. You don't have to change much. You just add these 2 little things and it'll just smooth over this thing. Very like show doctor talk. And so then during this conversation, he's like, why don't we just do this for the podcast? We're going to be watching stuff anyway, and we're going to be talking about this stuff anyway. So why don't we just do that in front of a microphone? I was like, that's a great idea. And it could be just like the gamut of media. It could be lots of things. And especially with how we focus on the storytelling, it was really interesting to start kind of talking about how we could incorporate things that we don't necessarily traditionally think of as kind of media that was, you know, reviewable in that sense. Like I'm thinking about even a podcast episode, like something that's even like nonfiction, or a video game where it's like, how do we actually tell this story in like a non-linear way? Because a lot of video games are non-linear like this, and how does it work? Like I'm really interested to do Zelda Breath of the Wild, and the new one, I haven't played it yet, but like to really talk about like how does the storytelling actually work here? And things like even reality TV shows, where like we're in the works of like figuring out how to do like RuPaul's Drag Race, and just like talk about like how do they do storytelling in these, grand ways that we talk about it. It's like, well, how does it actually work in this context? And we just thought that was so interesting. And then it turns out I guess we can be you can let us know if this is true, but I think we have a chemistry and a rapport, and we like to talk about these things. And we're discovering new things as we talk, and it's very natural. So it was a kind of, the lazy man's way in, where I'm like, well, I'm going to do this anyway. And I can just like, go to this studio and do the thing I would have done anyway, just in front of a camera, in front of a microphone. And so now, I'm hopefully, fingers crossed, kind of we wanted to establish ourselves as, maybe someday in the future, like show doctors or story doctors, where people are like, my story's not working. Can you come just watch it and just see if I can, fix it? Or even just like, what do you think, preliminary, just take a look at it and see what you think. Because we're both pretty good at it. My husband, Colin, is very, very good at it. He is like, when I write something, he's the alpha reader. He is the first person to look at it. And he always, always, always finds those like three things that is like, you need to change this and this and this and this, and that'll be great. And to have that skill and be able to talk about these things for an audience that I think maybe doesn't always think of it in these ways. And sometimes it's even just a frustration, where it's like watching something that either, I guess frequently it's like, everybody loves this thing and I hate it. And I think everybody's wrong, and here's why I hate it. Or a little more subtle, it's like, yeah, that thing was good, but it's not good because of what you said. That's not what makes it good. This is actually what you're missing. Here's what people are missing about this, because nobody's talking about it and nobody's bringing it up. Prime example is Everything Everywhere All at Once. Everybody loved that movie, and it just felt like nobody was talking about the things that we were noticing about it. Noticing about like the fact that like the relationship, spoiler alert, the relationships between like the daughter and the mother, they don't actually really change, because people don't. By the end, it's not some like grand, like, we're all different now, it feels good. That's not what happens with people. The change is so small and so minor, and it reflects how humans actually behave. Another was Ted Lasso is really similar, where it's like their conflicts are so genuine and real, and they don't expect each other to just kind of like give up because I gave the best argument. That was like a very big problem with like the morning show on Apple Plus, where it's like people would have these like, almost, it's like poor man's Aaron Sorkin kind of like monologue at someone. And then the person's like, I guess I'm convinced. And it's like, absolutely not. You just got yelled at and you think you're going to be convinced? That's not what happens. People don't just like say the clever, pithy thing and then everybody else is like, oh, cool, I guess I'm convinced because you gave me a good argument. That's never how people work. And it's always about relationships. And it is always about relationships. And if people miss that either in the writing or when they're actually watching, critiquing a show or a movie, it's not just about the hot dog fingers. It's those relationships and how they manifest in the different strategies these avatars in the movie or in the story are actually employing to get the things that they want.
Yeah. Has looking into stories, when you're consuming stories now, I imagine you probably always were, as you said, it was something that you did, but I imagine now, since doing the show, that there's even more of a little light in that mind's eye when you're watching and consuming stories. Has that affected your writing since taking that much of it? So if you sit down and watch a new TV show and you have in the back of your head just noting things down, maybe we could talk about this. Oh, does that work or not? How do I feel about this? That kind of thing. Does that way of thinking, if you will, because I think most people just kind of chill out. I just don't want to. If they say it's good, if they say that they're going to do it, then I'm just, I'm an audience member. I don't want to do that. But then obviously there's a few of us who just can't help but notice certain things, and it winds us up. But but having that sort of view, has that changed the way that you approach the stories that you're creating yourself? Because it's sometimes difficult, isn't it? When it's your own stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's very difficult, and that's why it's very helpful to have such a clever, story doctor in my midst with my husband, because I think I'm good at it too, but I'm not good at it with my own stories. And part of that is I think after all this talk about like structure and like learning how to do it, I try not to structure too much when I'm creating stuff. I want it to be more organic. Because a lot of this stuff ends up being internalized. A lot of it, you don't really have to like. It was like one of the best pieces of advice for like acting I ever got was like, you don't have to like do all that like background work if you get it. Like, you don't have to like do imaginary memories for your character or like figure out what they eat for breakfast or do like substitutions and stuff in your mind if you understand what's happening. And you might just intuitively know what the character means and what to do. You don't have to do that extra work. Like, why do that if your brain does it? You just need it if you're confused or it's not working. And so I think there's something similar where it's like, I'm just going to write this story and it's mostly going to come out. I'm going to create this thing and it's going to be good. And there's going to be maybe a few things that need to be tweaked. And that's when you bring in a strategy or a technique, or you do an analysis and you're like, here's actually what's going on. And here's the little places where it's not working. Because most of it will come together because we've been watching these things forever. And that's the thing with a lot of these ideas that we bring in when we're watching or listening or reading things. These are not, imposed on top of story. It's not like, story structure isn't like, it's a framework for something that's already happening. When you look at these master works that have just been around forever, it's not like, they sat there and be like, well, I'm going to put an inciting incident here, and then I'm going to, and maybe they did just like think about it a little bit, but like most of the time when people just tell a story, those things would just happen because we've been watching and listening and reading to stories forever. We've been listening to our friends tell stories around the campfire. We've been watching plays, and it just happens. You ask like a 3-year-old to tell you a story, and they're going to start with an inciting incident and a thing that they want and a character, and they're going to go through a middle, and then they're going to go through to the end of the story. And it might be weird, and they have a weird imagination, but it's basically going to follow that structure because it just happens. So part of it is when I'm watching, I think that it changes more when I'm watching something, I think, than it does when I'm creating something. Unless I'm, overthinking stuff, which I often do when I'm writing. But if I can just like let it go, I'm just like, I'm just going to like write and see what happens. And so it's good. And I can like let it go. But watching is different because once something is a little out of place, then I'm just like out. And then I've just like zeroed in on it. It's really hard to get back in to moment things, even though if I know in the back of my mind, like, actually, this was a really good moment, but I'm still thinking about that thing that just like threw me out because now I'm just not in the reality. And it also, on the other side, makes it that much more magical if I forget that I'm watching a story. I forget, watching West Side Story. We talk about this on an episode of, it hasn't released yet, I don't think, but we have an episode about West Side Story. So we just saw the Lyric Opera did a production here, and I really liked it, but mostly because I really love that play, and I forget that Tony's going to die every time. And not like intellectually. I'm not stupid. Like, I know the script. I've read it. I've seen it 1,000 times. But there's still, it's like watching Moulin Rouge and being like, oh, they're gonna like live forever and they're gonna be happy. And at the end, I know she's dying. They've shown me 1,000 times that she's like has tuberculosis or something. And they get to the end and come what may. And then you're like, oh my God, yay, it's so nice they won. And then she dies. And you're like, oh yeah, I forgot. And that magic of being lost also becomes a lot more potent when I have this view, because it's difficult to stay in there. So a story like really does it if I'm like, oh, I am in it. I'm in this story, even though, I mean, it triggers that again, that instinctual thing that we have in our minds that suck us into stories. Even though I know everything there is to know about stories, not everything, no, I don't know everything, but I am so inundated in stories and I think about them and analyze them so much. And despite that, I can be lost in a story. And that speaks to how good the story is, I think.
Do you have like a go-to happy TV show or movie that you plonk yourself in front of if you're feeling a little bit?
Yeah. I love Futurama.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, speaking of like things that make me emotional, that last episode of Futurama, I know they're bringing it back and we'll see how I feel about it, but that last episode of Futurama is just like the best. A movie, I love Moonstruck. It was like a show that my parents used to watch all the time when like my mom was like sick. She'd be like, I'm gonna put on Moonstruck. And I love it. Cher, and it's Nicolas Cage's first movie. And Olympia Dukakis won, I think, the Oscar for it, and Cher won the Oscar for it. I mean, it's so good. It's a John Patrick Shanley script. It's brilliant and hilarious. And The Emperor's New Groove is the best. I love that movie. We actually just watched it last night because we're going to talk about it tonight on Then a Moment, because it's Colin's birthday on Sunday, and we're doing like a special episode, a special like extra. We're going to release 2 episodes. Surprise, surprise. We're going to release 2 together because one of them is going to be the extra, and we're going to talk about Emperor's New Groove. But it's like, that is just, without fail, will make me very happy, and it's so good, and the storytelling's so good, and the acting is so good, and it's hilarious. Oh, it's so good.
That's fair. Mine's Ratatouille.
Oh,
best film ever made.
I love it. It's so cute. Did you watch the Ratatouille TikTok musical?
Was it just one video?
It was for a while, and then they produced the whole thing for Broadway Cares.
I have not seen the full thing. I saw a video, right? I think it was like one of the first things I ever saw on TikTok.
Yeah. Yes, it would have been really early, but because it was that video, it's like the Ratatouille song, and then people started like layering on top of it and then creating more songs and more characters, and it just got expanded in this whole thing. And then they got like big Broadway stars to come and actually perform the thing. So, and it's all Zoom, so it's like from their homes, but you can find it on YouTube. It's like the Ratatouille musical, the TikTok musical. And it's like Adam Lambert and Titus Burgess of Broadway fame, and from Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt and now Schmigadoon. He's in it. He plays Ratatouille, and it's wonderful. It's like, it's so silly, and it was like a fundraiser, and but you should watch it if you like Ratatouille. It's
It's the first thing I'm going to do once we end this interview.
Once we end. Screw the rest of my day. Clear my schedule. I'm going to watch the Ratatouille TikTok musical.
Where's the best place? Where's the best place for people to keep up with everything that you're doing, and of course to see and or listen to Then a Moment?
Yes. Well, you can find Then a Moment anywhere you find your podcasts: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, etc., etc. And then we're also on YouTube. We have very fancy videos, so please watch it till you get to see our handsome faces. And we always wear different outfits, so you get to kind of like see what our style is. And then for my other side, we're also Then a Moment is on all of the socials, so it's at Then a Moment Pod, basically everywhere. If anyone's wondering, Then a Moment is like a line from a musical, which is very like stupid and nerdy, but it's from Into the Woods. It's from Moment in the Woods, the song from Into the Woods, where the baker's wife singing. She's like, na 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 na, then a moment. And we just liked that because we always talk about moments in storytelling. Anyway, all that said, it's Then a Moment. Then a Moment Pod is where you can find us everywhere. My stuff is usually at Pavi Proczko, Paviproc as in cat, Z as in zebra, Ko, a good Irish name. That's a joke. It's not. It's very Ukrainian. And then at Pavi Proczko on Instagram. I am on TikTok sometimes, Facebook, and I have a website, paviproczkonarrator.com. And paviproczko.com. There's lots of places, but those are like, if you want to like really connect with me, Instagram's good, Facebook is good. We'll see about Threads. I have no idea what's going on. I'm like an old man now. I don't know what's happening with the social medias. And TikTok, you can find me there too, and you can see like live reads. You can see the stuff that I'm working on. And then, hopefully I'll have more news soon, but as I start writing stuff, that should be up there too.
Fantastic stuff. I'm with you on Threads.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening. I don't know. And it's like, people are like, it's going to be nicer than Twitter. I was like, you lie. It's not going to be nicer than Twitter. Stop it. It's just going to be a hellscape, the same thing. It's going to be a nightmare.
I'd love to end the show by simply asking if you have any upcoming projects that you're excited about and anything we can look forward to.
Yeah. Upcoming projects. I have Defiance of the Fall 10, which is I think probably my biggest series. I'm pretty sure. Defiance of the Fall 10 is coming out in August, so fans can look forward to that. Of course, the first 9 are on Audible currently, so you can catch up real quick. It's an epic. I think it's like 3 million words or something so far. It's going to keep going for a bit. Well, I have a collection of short stories that I am planning to release this year or next year that I would like to publish in like a anthology. So I'll be doing some live reads on those on my socials. Every now and then, maybe like once a month, I'll be doing one of them. And then I want to have them kind of collected in a package for audiobooks and for Kindle, or maybe a little hard copy it if I can get the funding. We'll Kickstarter it, maybe. How about that? Everyone go to Kickstarter when I do the thing. We'll find it. I think those are the big 2. And then as I'm doing it, I am fingers crossed, producing the music for a big Dungeons and Dragons event here in Chicago. So I'm writing it's called Dinner and Dragons, and it's supposed to be this big like banquet thing, and there's a king and blah, blah. But I'm supposed to produce the music. So as that starts getting created, I'll be sharing a little bit of that too. So yeah, I think those are mostly the things that I'm excited about at the moment. And then of course I'm always just recording more books. Just always more books.
Sounds fantastic. I, for one, can't wait.
Yeah.
That just brings us to a close for this episode and series of the Audiobook Club. All of the links to Pavi's social media, podcast, and recent projects will be linked in the show notes. Thank you so much for tuning in. And of course, another huge, huge, huge thank you to you, Pavi, for joining us. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Frustrated by the royalty rates for your audiobook? Annoyed that when the digital distributors say 70% royalties, they actually mean 70% of 50% or 80% of 70%, neither of which is an actual 70%. Wishing there was a way to cut out the middleman? Yet, you want your audiobook listeners to have a smooth and positive experience, and a direct download sale from your website won't deliver that. We at Pro Audio Voices hear you. Out of our commitment to our author clients, we've created Amplify, a program that provides an actual 65% of the sales price that you set, that gives you access to your customers' names and emails so you can reconnect with them, and keeps you in the driver's seat. Check it out at proaudiovoices.com. You'll find Amplify in the marketing menu.